Welcome, once again, to the official MUFON Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Beckwith. Tonight, my guest is Stephen Bassett. Stephen Bassett is the executive director of Paradigm Research Group, founded in 1996 to end a government-imposed embargo on the truth behind the so-called UFO phenomenon. Stephen has spoken to audiences around the world about the implications of formal disclosure by world governments of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. He has given over 1,000 radio and television interviews, and PRG's advocacy work has been extensively covered by national and international media. In 2013, PRG produced a citizen hearing on disclosure at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. On November 5, 2014, PRG launched a congressional hearing political initiative seeking the first hearings on Capitol Hill since 1968 regarding the extraterrestrial presence. PRG has assisted numerous organizations and initiatives working to 1. Raise public awareness of both the extraterrestrial presence and the Truth Embargo, 2. Convene open congressional hearings to take government and agency witnesses' testimony, and 3. Incite the political media to appropriately cover the attendant issues. Developments, both political and exopolitical, have been underway in Washington, D.C. over the past 3 years, as we all know. For this reason, Stephen has relocated back to the nation's capital to renew engagement of Congress and the political media. He has committed to stay until disclosure has been achieved. In support of this effort, PRG has leased an office in the National Press Building, the home of the National Press Club, of which Bassett is a member. From the office, PRG will launch the first exopolitical video podcast out of Washington, D.C., The Disclosure Wire. Guests are being drawn from researchers, activists, witnesses, mainstream journalists, and political pundits in studio or via remote. The Disclosure Wire will be free to all to share, post, or place on any streaming venue. There will be no paywall, no advertising, and no products for sale. The Disclosure Wire, like all of the projects from PRG, has one purpose: end the government-imposed truth embargo regarding an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. I have to say I am very happy to have him here tonight. Stephen Bassett, welcome to the program.
Richard, it's excellent to be with you for the first time.
I really appreciate you being here, Steve. I have to tell you that I've wanted to talk to you for the longest time, to talk to you about the disclosure issues and all the work that you've done to get the job done. And the first thing I guess I have to ask you is, what's changed? What's changed in the last couple of years that brings disclosure, you think, closer?
That's a key question. Something major has changed. I've been at this since '96. The Truth Embargo, as I call it, is essentially 74 years old. And up until recently, it was a citizen science research journalist project, meaning regular citizens spending their own dime were researching this phenomena, setting up organizations like MUFON, creating podcasts, broadcasts, newsletters, magazines. The government was doing none of that. The mainstream media was following the issue, was writing about it, but was not investigating it. They weren't pushing the government, so they've written thousands of articles. But essentially, the citizens were on their own because the government made a decision that this must be embargoed. And it was not easy. And when you're up against the state, and the state literally denies the fundamental truth of the issue you're engaging, that makes activism pretty hard. Just imagine if the civil rights movement was trying to get segregation ended in the South, and the U.S. government was constantly telling everyone that there is no segregation in the South. Everything's just fine down there. That would have made it a little tougher. So that's what we've been facing. But then something happened. It happened, I believe, it started coming together 2015, 2016. Might have started in 2014. The reasons are not clear. I can speculate. But what essentially took place was that a critical mass of support for ending the truth embargo accumulated within the military intelligence complex. I'm suspecting that primarily within the Department of Defense. And by that, I don't mean a formal policy of the Department of Defense. I mean a group of people in there who have some position decided that this thing needed to get going, and they wanted to do something. They wanted to help.
Are we talking about Lou Elizondo?
Not yet.
Okay.
But we're getting there. This group felt that it's time to end this, but what could they do? They certainly couldn't take any actions while working for the Pentagon or working for any of the agencies. It simply would have been illegal, career destroying, and inappropriate. And so what do you do? And that's one of the reasons why it hadn't been done. There have always been people inside the agencies and military services and so forth, going all the way back to the 50s, who felt probably should tell the people the truth about this, but it simply wasn't the policy, and they were not going to go against that policy, and they did their jobs, no problem. So the plan they came up with, as near as I can tell, because they have not given the details, and these people are not known, none of the people still working at the Pentagon are known, is what if a non-governmental organization, an NGO, were to be created, possibly a corporation, actually a public service corporation, that's fine, could raise money, help fund things. And this particular NGO just happened to be made up of individuals of substantial military intelligence or research careers within the government, people with high security clearances, very accomplished, PhDs and so forth. But these people were no longer on government payroll. Well, they could do things that we cannot do. And I think it took a while to figure out how to do this and who would be involved in all of that. But along the way, a fellow by the name of Tom DeLonge got attached to the project because he was extremely interested in doing something along these lines. And he had been poking at the at individuals connected to the military intelligence community for a long time. And he had they just came together. So Tom DeLonge was brought into the project, and we first learned about the possibility of something like this in March of 2016. Tom DeLonge gave an interview to George Knapp on Coast to Coast and alluded to a lot of developments coming, including some books and info and all that kind of stuff. I found it a little hard to accept, but then one of those books he mentioned was published the next month. And that was it. Didn't hear anything else until the WikiLeaks release just before the election of 2016, when we learned that Tom DeLonge had been interacting with John Podesta, introducing him to some insiders and so forth. Maybe even sat down for Podesta sat down for an interview. There was a lot of emails that were released to the public. A lot of people would have had the clue what they meant or what the implications were. I did. But it didn't specifically say what the project was, but it surely confirmed that what Tom DeLonge was talking about in March of that year had some substance. Then the election was lost by Secretary Clinton, and nothing more was heard about this project for a number of months. This didn't surprise me because pretty early on, I concluded that the project, one of the key reasons the project was created was because a lot of people within the DOD became convinced that Secretary Clinton was not only going to win the election, that was a consensus, but that she had serious intentions regarding the disclosure issue, meaning end the truth embargo. Excuse me. This, of course, would be a very significant thing with huge implications for the Department of Defense and the entire military intelligence complex. And they couldn't stop it. And so I think they decided to get ahead of it. That's my sense. But this is my assessment. I cannot prove that. I do not have documents backing up that assessment, and I don't have any access to people inside the DOD. So we waited. I went to England, kind of hung out there, did some things, and then boom, the announcement came on October 11th, 2017. It was a Facebook video, and they announced and set up the website for the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. Tom DeLonge was the CEO. The mission statements to address issues related to the UAP phenomena, as well as some other things. Number of other divisions involving entertainment, documentaries. So it's a combination: research, entertainment, corporation, public service. They started raising stock, and they announced who was involved. So far, it's pretty benign, not benign, but pretty mundane, until you read the bios of the people that were involved. And that day, when I read those bios, I remember it vividly. I said, this is the most important development in the history of the UAP issue and the disclosure advocacy movement. These people were former career CIA, former career Department of Defense intelligence, former political operatives of high rank, significant researchers, some known, some not known. This was a VIP list. No group this substantial has ever come together on this issue since Roswell, and certainly not with respect to a disclosure kind of initiative or a disclosure process. And so that is what has changed the last 3 years dramatically.
Let me ask you this, Steve.
Certainly.
What are they going to tell us? I mean, you and I, and individuals that do this kind of stuff, we know what the truth is. But what are they going to tell the public? Is there not, I mean, let's really think about this, Steve. Isn't there not a fear that there will be, a very difficult reaction to the news if they tell us, for example, if they just simply come out and say, guess what? We're being visited by aliens from some other location, whether it be in another dimension or another star system. How are people going to take that? Are they going to be able to, I mean, really, literally, are they going to be able to handle that sort of information? Or is that the information they're going to give us?
Well, you've jumped ahead to disclosure itself. Disclosure with a capital D, meaning the formal confirmation. But what we're talking about right now is the changes that have happened with respect to the disclosure process.
Yes.
I'll get to that question, which is a reasonable question. But let me first fill in your audience about these developments. So the logical thing, of course, was to wait until what's their first move going to be, because what they were going to do next would tell us everything we needed to know about pretty much what this was all about. Now, there was a group like this just doesn't come together by coincidence or because a bunch of guys didn't have anything to do and they decided, hey, let's form a group and maybe look at the UFO ET issue and so forth. No. And particularly these kinds of people. So we waited. We'd have to wait long. And then the next major event, this was the turning point event, was on December 16th, 2017. The To the Stars Academy people had gone to the New York Times with information for the New York Times to consider. The New York Times vetted this information well, talked to people, talked to witnesses, and then published 2 groundbreaking articles on the front page of the New York Times on December the 16th. The authors were Leslie Kean, Arlene Cooper, I believe, and Ralph Blumenthal, a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. Now, a lot of your audience knows about these articles, probably most of them, frankly, given this is the MUFON podcast. But just very quickly, they announced that there had been an investigation on the phenomena within the DOD that had been run by one of the To the Stars Academy people, Luis Elizondo. They announced that that this project was put together at the behest of the then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, that other senators had helped Reid raise the funds, $22 million, that a lot of this money went to Robert Bigelow, a billionaire who was a friend of Reid, and so forth. That was a big story right then and there. They also delivered to the Times 3 gun camera footages that had clearly been declassified by the Pentagon. The most notable is called the Tic Tac footage, and then there's the Go Fast footage and so forth. So there's 3 of these gun camera footages. Now, a lot of people would have said, oh, great. Okay, it's nice that the Times has some film. For people like you and me, we knew something quite different. because this was the first formal release of gun camera footage of UAP intercepts by any government ever in the history of the world.
Yes.
It had never happened. One gun camera footage, a piece of it had leaked. How it leaked is not clear. Ended up in a French documentary. So in a sense, but that wasn't a formal release, and nobody knew about it and forgotten about it. This was a formal release delivered to the New York Times, which then put these gun camera footages up on their website, which have now been seen worldwide by countless millions of people. This had never happened. Why? Because, and this is something I like to emphasize very, very firmly, every country in the world that has had a relatively modern Air Force going back to the 50s has been intercepting UAVs, meaning they go up because they're invading their airspace to check them out. And when they do that, they film it. You always do this when in defense of Air Force and so forth. You have to do it. You can't simply go up and see what's going on and realize, oh, that's not supposed to be here, then shoot it down and have no record of that, because you could create an international incident. Or you can't just go up and look at it and then come back and tell the debriefers, well, look, I let me draw it for you. Here's what I saw. You film it. And we've been doing this all the way back into the 40s. All that footage you see of World War II, these air fights and so forth, are coming from cameras that are mounted on the planes, and they usually mount them in one of the gun pods. It's convenient to do that. That's why we call it gun camera footage. There are thousands and thousands of these clips in the vaults of governments around the world. Why haven't they been released? Because anybody knows, any reasonable person knows, that if you were to start releasing the actual films of these intercepts, the Truth Embargo would collapse. The Truth Embargo was the policy of the U.S. government. It was supported by all of its allies. The Soviet Union and Communist China had no interest in bringing this out. And so that footage remained in the vaults for 74 years until it was given to the New York Times. And so for people inside the government, military people, people inside the political class, researchers and academics, they knew the significance of that, if the general public may not have known. And of course, the researchers in this field, like you and myself. So that told me that we had crossed the Rubicon. Once those gun camera films were presented to the New York Times and published for, in the age of the internet, everyone to see. I mean, there's nobody in the world that can't go find that footage. It's on YouTube, right? How many times it's been seen? Let's guess 100 million, maybe more. We had crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back. The disclosure process was in its end game, and it was a limited amount of time before we would finally get confirmation from a head of state, most likely the president. That's a big deal. So that's the articles. Then what happens next is fascinating. Two things are going on. One, the political situation in the United States was completely chaotic. It was unprecedented. Everybody was trying to feel their way and how to do this and how to do that. It was a difficult time to do anything. And in fact, not a lot was happening. Bills were piling up in the Senate by the hundreds, but no action taken. All manner of projects were kind of on hold. It was just an interesting, complex time. And so it was not likely, almost impossible, that any formal action by the government was going to be taken based upon these New York Times articles. But what did happen is that we were getting responses from agencies, from the Navy, from the Army, from researchers. In other words, people started, I guess, reacting to this new reality. I call it positioning, but ultimately, another analogy is that when those articles appeared in the New York Times, essentially the disclosure train, which has been sitting in the station for 70 years, announced that and it would soon be leaving the station, and started stocking up the diner cars and so forth, preparing to leave. And everybody needs to decide whether you're going to get on that train or you're going to stay on the platform as it moves away.
Can I tell you something? Can I tell you
Yes,
something?
sir. Absolutely.
Before that happened, I've been familiar with your work for many, many years, and you've been doing this for a really long time. I used to support you. I mean, I still do, of course, but I mean, but I also remember always thinking to myself, uh, this guy's barking up the wrong tree. The government is never going to tell us anything. And then exactly what you're talking about happened. And I thought to myself, you know something? Stephen Bassett's right. This is going to break at some point.
There is a very famous moment in American history where George Wallace, I really should get the exact date and the location, so my example will be more powerful, but I don't have it handy at this point. But it was a speech. He was giving it to a crowd, probably in Alabama, and he said, segregation, I'm sorry, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And he was making a point that the South would never integrate. Not long after that, the Civil Rights Acts were passed in 64 and 68. And of course, we know what happened. So that is the nature of activism, particularly at the highest levels involving high authority. It's never going to happen until it happens. And the reason it happens is because the issue is so important that the number of people willing to commit to changing it is large and grows. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be sacrifice. There's always sacrifice, and sometimes the sacrifice is how would you say, the highest order of sacrifice. But this issue has had backers and it has had supporters, not only for the research and the activism for the entire 74 years, but obviously in recent times, the number of people coming on board, the number of people that know about it, the public awareness, thanks to the internet, thanks to media and everything else, has grown. And so, and eventually it gets to a point where there's enough pressure and enough interest that you win. You cross the finish line. Now, how long that takes depends upon a lot of factors. It depends upon financial support. It depends upon historical events, commitment, and all that. But whatever. This has been a 74-year activist movement that started off very slow. But 74 years is about typical for major political movements, whether it's a civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the suffrage movement, the anti-colonial movement. You look at them and you find they tend to run about 50, 60, 70, even 100 years. And a lot of people that get involved early, they don't live to see the outcome. We're going to be fortunate that we will live to see the outcome. So the responses that you've been seeing, the in the news here and there, the best way to think about them is that all kinds of people and agencies and institutions and so forth are trying to react and position themselves with respect to what they're pretty sure is coming. Now, all that's well and good. I'm paying close attention to that. I come back to the U.S. in January of 2018, and I'm out in California this time, I think, and I'm out there for quite a while. And there's not much I can do. Right. I've been out of the country for a while. I come back, and the disclosure process is fully in the hands of the To the Stars Academy and its key people. Quickly, we learn that the key people are Tom DeLonge, Luis Elizondo, and Christopher Mellon. And so I wait to see what comes next. What came next was they created a History Channel series called Unidentified inside America's secret UFO investigation. They had 2 seasons, total of 14 episodes. That was nice. And they were giving interviews, and I was logging those in. I have a huge amount of material about the TTSA on my website, including 160 video clips of presentations and news coverage, as well as nearly 700 mainstream news articles earmarked regarding the TTSA. And if someone goes to my website, they can read all 700 if they want to. So I'm following it very, very closely. But there's not much I can do. These guys are on the field. They're moving up the field with the football. I'm on the sidelines paying attention. But then something came to mind. Then I began to learn some things that changed my decision-making process, and that is this. I knew about the witnesses that were coming forward, particularly to Luis Elizondo, and they were turning up in the unidentified series. But I learned that Chris Mellon was setting up meetings on the Hill. I think Elizondo was involved in some of those initially too, but Chris Mellon was the one that was primarily leading these meetings on the Hill. Why? Because he was the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. He had enormous experience on the Hill in the intelligence world, as well as in the DOD. So if anybody's going to set up meetings, rather, if I said hearings, please, it's meetings, briefings. Mm-hmm. It was Mellon. And so we learned that X number of members of Congress, including committee chairs, were taking meetings with Chris Mellon and some of the witnesses, primarily we think the pilots from the Nimitz event, but there could have been others. We know this because some of these members did mention it, but they didn't go into specifics because these were off-the-record meetings, not classified, but off the record, meaning, I want to meet and talk with you. We have some witnesses about this issue we'd like you to talk to. We do not want this to go to the public. We do not want this to be given to the press. These are background briefings. Now, they've held to that by and large through all of that time, probably over a year, going into 2020. I don't know when the meeting started. I think they started in summer of 2019. So they might have been going over 16 months. But the specifics simply did not come out until an action by by the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So the question is, if they're having these meetings, why? What is the purpose? Just to inform them? What would it be? Well, there's only one reason you do this. You do this in order to prepare the Congress for congressional hearings. In other words, you're giving them a heads up. This is what's on the table. This is where things are going. These are the kinds of witnesses we have, and we want to have hearings. So the next question would be, well, if that's the case, why didn't they push for hearings in 2019? Right away, get going. Or 2020? Well, there's two reasons. One, they could have happened. I'm not saying they couldn't have happened. But the political situation was extremely unfavorable for holding hearings on this subject. There was so much disruption and intense partisanship and news regarding this and that it was, and the idea that this subject would be taken on by committee chairs who when they hold a hearing, they're the ones that take the heat if there's a problem. They're the ones that are expending the political capital. But maybe by 2020, it's possible that they could have worked it out, except the pandemic showed up. Nobody invited it, nobody wanted it, nobody ordered it, but it showed up. And so, again, there was absolutely no chance for the hearings on this subject. On the other hand, it gave the members of Congress the chance to think long and hard about what to do and how they would go about it. And meanwhile, of course, more developments are taking place. And one of those developments was non-trivial. One of the people briefed was Marco Rubio, chairman of the Intelligence Committee. And of course, the ranking member, Mark Warner, was briefed. And Warner just said that he'd had a briefing. He didn't take any action. Rubio decided to take action, which was his prerogative. And he did something very clever. What he did, in other words, remember my analogy about the announcement has been made that in due course the disclosure train's leaving the station, who's getting on board? Mm-hmm. Rubio got on board the train, and in a very interesting way, he deliberately put language in the comment section of the Defense Intelligence Appropriations Bill that once that bill was signed, the ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, and some other agencies had 180 days to get back to the Intelligence Committee with their assessment of what's going on right now and how they're dealing with it. Not some full dump of everything in the government on this issue, not by a long shot, but rather a reasonable assessment provided to the committee. Now, the general public got real excited about this, and I get that, but I didn't get so excited because I knew it was going on. And so what had happened is that Rubio, who was not up for election, had put this language in, putting it on notice that he was supporting this thing that was going on, that people were reading all about. But he put a 180-day deadline on it, meaning that until it would be well into 2021 before that would be getting back to the Intelligence Committee. So that was on the other side of the election. It would have no impact on that. Plenty of time to work it out. So it was an extremely safe play, and yet a very good one for him. So he is now on the disclosure train. So that took place. And so, okay, fine. So where I finally arrive, I'm sorry. I left out one important thing. In 2019, late in 2019, I also learned something else. I learned that one of these briefings, these behind-the-scene, off-the-record briefings, was given to the president. And that's a big deal. And so at that point, I said, I have to get back to Washington because I think I know where this is going and when it's going to go. So I relocated back to D.C. I was lucky. I was able to get an office in the National Press Building, which is where the National Press Club is. I belong to the press club, and 2 blocks from the White House. And I set it up as a studio, intending to do a podcast addressing the issue of disclosure, and having interviews with guests and so forth. I came back to Washington. I got here, I think, finally got back in March of 2020. As the pandemic was rocketing forward, but I set up. I had everything I needed, and I got going. Going where? To engage the public and the media, as I had done before during the Clinton campaign of 2015-16, going all the way back to the Rockefeller Initiative. And what was I engaging the public on, and will be extensively? I am absolutely convinced that the game plan has been to hold congressional hearings on this subject for military witnesses, not one-day hearings like 1968, but multiple days, maybe weeks, with many witnesses and multiple committees, primarily, again, military witnesses. That when the To the Stars Academy was created, the intention was to hold those hearings early in the Clinton administration. But when that didn't happen, they weren't particularly keen on pushing that in the Trump administration. But nevertheless, Trump was going to be president for 4 years. And so they pursued a course of action during the administration. But eventually, they concluded that Trump was not going to win. And I think they concluded that a lot sooner than the general public. They have access to they have the access to the military intelligence community. They have plenty. All these TTSA guys have access to their former agencies and so forth. I think they had a pretty good idea he was going to lose. So they start ratcheting things up, anticipating that a change in the Washington situation, particularly administration, would make these hearings doable. And therefore, they would proceed as they had intended to before. As it happened, the administration did change. As it happened, the Senate did change, which wasn't a guarantee. And that was important as well. And so now the path was clear to hold these congressional hearings. And that has been the agenda, I believe, for the TTSA. And I've been saying this for a while, and I'm watching carefully for any indications that point to that conclusion. I'm prepared to back off of it if I see indications to the contrary. And then we had a very significant indication. And what was that? About 10 days ago, the 3 key people of the To the Stars Academy group, some were advisors, you got your members, you got your advisors, you got and so forth, your board and what have you. Mm-hmm. The 3 key members of that group were Steve Justice, Chris Mellon, and Luis Elizondo. Elizondo is the DoD intelligence person. Mellon is the political operative. Justice is the defense contractor, former associate director of Skunk Works. These people were involved in this stuff in a very hard, real way. And they stepped out of the TTSA. In other words, they simply separated from it. No acrimony, no problems, all very amicable. It was a strategic decision. Why? Because as we move towards actually having the hearings, which involves more than just having some private meetings with some members of Congress, it involves some negotiations and so forth. the Stars Academy and its multifaceted mission plan and its entertainment division and Tom DeLonge and all that was not the interface for that. That's not who the people on the Hill are going to be dealing with. They don't want to deal with that. It's just not the appropriate interface. So these gentlemen left, and now they're dealing with the Congress as individuals representing the issue. Now, what they're going to do and how they're going to go up next, I don't know. But at this point, they're independent operatives, and that's exactly who you want dealing with the Congress. Okay, so that confirmed to me that that's where we're going. And so what I'm telling everybody that is willing to listen is that the stage has been set for congressional hearings on this issue. Witnesses have been gathered. Military witnesses have been contacting Luis Elizondo for almost a year and a half. I've gotten information that it's scores of military people, retired or active, have gotten in touch with Elizondo because they've watched the Unidentified series. They're reading the articles. They're watching what's happening to the witnesses like Fravor and others, and they realize that they can come forward now, that it's safe to come forward and talk. I'm not saying it's safe to divulge material that's classified, but it's safe to come forward with their stories. And they've been collecting these. Now, some of these witnesses have appeared on the Unidentified show, but there are more than that. And so the witnesses are there. They have them. They have enough to populate the hearings. And then, of course, the congressional members, a significant number, including key committee chairs, have been briefed. And so the table's set to hold the hearings. And once the new president took office, the ability to move forward was there. Now, the only question now in my mind is when can the hearings happen? Now, I am making a strong case when I can, and I may make it later in this interview, that it's extremely important that these hearings happen sooner than later. In other words, this year and preferably this spring. They could easily have happened as soon as February, and I would have supported that as well. And I'll tell you why in a bit, but let me just say that that's what I believe it should be. And so the question is, okay, well, what's the situation? Because things could prevent it. Two things have probably delayed these hearings happening real soon. One is the events that took place after the election was certified last year by the states. Once the election was certified by the states, it was a done deal as far as I was concerned. Then I started talking more aggressively about having these hearings. However, as you know, things did not quite work out that way. And so what happened is we ended up with a second impeachment of the president and a second trial, which just went underway yesterday and will probably last about 10 days. That, of course, is absolutely dominant, and nothing else is going to happen while that's going on. The second thing is that the pandemic has, well, obviously the pandemic's been a problem, but the pandemic is continuing to develop. And the most important new development is the rise of the variants, I like to call them. Sounds like a good sci-fi movie. The rise of the variants. This is not good. There are a number of known variants that have created problems for the healthcare systems and for possibly the vaccines. Most people don't know or understand what variants are. And it's kind of confusing, but over 700 variants have been found within the U.S. COVID-19 virus, and we're doing very little genomic testing. Other countries are testing far 1,000 times more than we are. And so the total number of variants worldwide right now, Lord knows what they are, but that is the nature of flu viruses, or viruses rather. They easily mutate. And the thing that prevents that from becoming a problem is by getting on top of the virus very quickly. And so if a virus develops, like some of the Ebolas, and it may kill some people, it may spread, but if you knock it down and it's gone in a month, and the number of people infected is not great, your risk is very low. But when a virus goes global, when it infects hundreds of millions of people, which this virus has, and lasts and is in play for months and months and months, the number of replications is in the trillions. It's probably quadrillions. It's a big number. We're talking 10 to the power of something. And so what you have is exactly identical to the lottery. You buy a ticket to the lottery and your chances of winning a power lottery is something like, I don't know, 190 million to 1. And so there's not much chance you're going to win. But if you buy 190 million tickets to the lottery, there's a very good chance you could win. And so in the case of viruses, when you have trillions of mutations, the chances of one of those mutations being a huge problem is far greater, much greater, and becomes a real possibility. So we're seeing some of that already. And the other thing I'll mention, without trying to scare everybody to death, is that the 1919 flu disaster, plague, you almost call it, was caused not by the initial virus. The initial virus produced a relatively standard reaction. X number of people died relative to the time. I mean, probably not as many would have died now, but the situation back in 1919 was not like this. But then the virus mutated. There was a variant that emerged out of Europe. I forget the country they think it came from. And that came back over the United States. And this variant was deadly. And it killed people by the millions. So that is the possibility we're facing. So because of that, the hearings are not likely to happen soon. There's just too much that needs to be dealt with there. It puts huge limitations on bringing people together and whatever. And so the timing, the impeachment thing will be over shortly. The timing for hearings now is pretty much dependent on the vaccination progress. In other words, and the variant development. So if the number of vaccinations continues to accelerate and we get a very high number in the next 60 days or so, and the mutation situation doesn't get out of hand, I believe we can certainly have those hearings this spring. And that's my message to your audience. If you want to ask me about the disclosure or anything else, fire away.
Certainly. What is going to come out in the hearings?
Good question. What's going to come out in the hearings and the way they're being set up is totally expected and appropriate. In order to get these hearings, the members of Congress and the committee chairs have to have a damn good reason. You don't hold hearings just because you feel like it. Now, there have been some frivolous hearings in the past, but the more significant of the issue, the better the reason better be. Because if it doesn't go well, you're going to pay a heavy political price. And so the reason is national security. No problem. It's always pretty much been that. The interest in this issue is national security. The reason that the government instituted a truth embargo that they're maintaining to this day is national security. They're not just doing it because they don't like aliens, right? They just don't like the idea. They're doing it because from the beginning, they considered the ET presence a potential threat. And they certainly should have.
And they still do, right?
Absolutely. Potential threat. Now, the degree of that potential threat, I think, has changed. I believe one of the reasons that the TTSA exists at all is because quite a few people within the defense intelligence community have concluded after 74 years of watching this phenomena that, well, it's not the potential threat we thought it might be back in 1949 or 52. If it was a real threat, some terrible things would have happened by now, but it's still a potential threat and a national security issue. And therefore, it's absolutely appropriate to hold hearings on this. Now, you might say, well, if it's appropriate, why do we have hearings more recently? Why was the last hearing a one-day, basically, knockoff event in 1968? Well, because while it is a national security issue, the truth embargo policy was prevalent. That was the policy. And hearings would end that truth embargo. And that was considered a national security issue. In other words, ending the truth embargo would be considered a national security issue. And so the two had to remain separate. Now they're coming together. Now it's looking like they have come to the conclusion, while it's a national security threat, it's not that great that it should be withheld, the information be withheld from the public, thus setting the stage for these hearings. So if you watch all of the unidentified episodes on History Channel, if you listen to all the interviews of Mellon and Elizondo, you will constantly see this basic thread of national security with mentions of the word threat. Now, they tend to use potential threat, but sometimes they just say threat. I believe that's a mistake. I don't think it's intentional. It's just so easy to do. Threat, potential threat, what's the difference? It's a big difference.
Well, it's also the world that they come from.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, so I get it. But let's be clear the difference between threat and potential threat. Here's a threat. Somebody calls you up and says they're going to kill you, all right? And they appear outside your house with a weapon. They are a threat, okay? Somebody that you offended, right, made very angry to the point where you've really caused them serious trouble, got them in trouble with the law. They are a potential threat. That's the difference. The ETs are a potential threat. They are not a threat. There is no evidence that they are a threat in the public domain. If the government has clear evidence that they are an actual threat, they haven't told us, all right? So maybe that's the case. Well, if that's the case, then you would not see the kinds of government activities and the existence of the TTSA, other things. That says that they have pretty much concluded they're just a potential threat. Okay, so there you have it. That's the basis for the hearings, a national security matter. Let's look into it. Now, the witnesses, well, if it's going to be national security, you want the witnesses to be military. You don't want any ET, UAP researchers. I have many colleagues that do that. You don't want some political activist like me. You don't want any contactees. You want just military witnesses like Fravor, like Salas, and any of the witnesses to the nuclear weapons tampering. There are plenty of them. So they come into the House and the Senate, sit down at that table. Their credentials are acknowledged and announced. Former commander, career, outstanding record, all that kind of stuff. They take an oath, not their first oath, because if you're in the military, you've taken an oath to tell the truth and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury. And so those are the witnesses that the public will be seeing, and they will carry tremendous weight. They will carry not only tremendous weight to the public, they will carry that weight to the press and to the members of Congress. All of this is perfect, just right. There's no political risk here. And they will tell their stories. And those stories, because I know many of those stories, will be confirming. They will make it quite clear that the only explanation for this phenomena, not every phenomena that's out there, but the core phenomena that we're focused on, is non-human intelligence. And once they have made that case for days and possibly weeks, in front of millions, I can't imagine how many millions of people are going to watch these hearings. It'll be a big, big number. Then they have given license to both the Congress, the Department of Defense, and the White House to meet privately and come to the conclusion, appropriately, that the evidence is clear. This is obviously an extraterrestrial phenomena. And it's clear we can see that. The public probably can see that. And therefore, I think it's time to confirm this. Let's confirm this. And now the president can go in front of the public and confirm that this evidence certainly establishes the reality of an extraterrestrial presence, an extraterrestrial technology. And everybody will go, great. Yeah, of course. As opposed to the president just one day getting up and saying, time to tell the people the truth. The context is there. The preparation is there. The awareness is there. And then, of course, the Congress will be on board. The Department of Defense will support it. This is the appropriate, responsible way. This is the way it always needed to be done. I've said that for 20 years. You got to have hearings, and we've tried to get them. I know many attempts to get congressional hearings. They've all been blocked. So if you block the hearings, that is very key to keeping the truth embargo going for as long as you want it to go. Once you have those hearings, game over. And so if those hearings begin, disclosure will follow. We're on the threshold of this.
Well, can I throw a little wrench in here for you?
Wrench away.
um, After the Pentagon, the videos were released, Lou Elizondo came and spoke to us. And one of the things that he told us was that there is considerable resistance within the Department of Defense at the Pentagon
Correct.
that stems from religious belief, faith-based resistance, and that there was a very powerful group of folks in national defense that believes fervently that the visitors are actually devils. And
Yes.
they really believe this. These are people that are at the highest levels of Pentagon leadership, and they have the belief that these aliens are actually born of Satan. And is that not going to continue to be a barrier to disclosure?
Let's parse this. Yes, I know what Elizondo said. He didn't say at the very, very highest levels. We don't know what levels they go to, but we will assume that they're in the Pentagon and some of them have some position. No question. We've known that for some time. It's an issue. It's been addressed. It's been in the news from time to time. There was some problems at the Air Force Academy over this. What is Elizondo really saying? What he's saying, and he's used that as an example. I would have rather he'd not done that. Because it's kind of putting the onus on religion is like the barrier, which has come up from time to time, but that's not the real barrier, I assure you. The truth embargo is not being driven by religious fanatics inside the military. The truth embargo is being driven by a formal policy of embargo instituted under Truman and Eisenhower and maintained by a significant portion of the national security state for 70 years. What he's saying is probably, what he's really saying is probably more important, is that, guess what? There are plenty of sectors within the military intelligence community that do not want the TTSA doing what it's doing. They do not support disclosure. I'm sure we can find people in the Pentagon that if you could get them away privately would say, I don't want this ever to be disclosed to the American people. I don't want them ever to know this because of the way I view it. Or I don't want them to know it until I'm dead and gone, right? There are people like that. It's no question. We've always known that. And what he's saying is, and what you need to hear is that, look, what we're doing is not easy and it has risks. And while we have support within the DOD and elsewhere, there are others that oppose it. Now, that doesn't surprise me at all. But what's really important about this is that, well, if the opposition was significant, they would have stopped it. Obviously, they couldn't stop it. These people, all these men and one woman, Dr. Gilpin, all have national security clearances and non-disclosure agreements, and they all took oaths. And so I assure you, and they were all career people, that if people inside the DOD wanted this shut down, it would have been shut down. Now, that said, it was pretty clear to me early on that a significant portion of the military intelligence community didn't know it was coming. In other words, they did not announce this.
Oh.
They did not send out emails to the CIA and the NSA and the Department of Defense and the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force saying, we're going to launch the To the Stars Academy on such and such a date. I don't think they did. And the indication of that is, if you watch what happened afterwards, you can see that DOD itself was taken by surprise. The front office didn't know what the hell was going on. Now, I'm not saying that rumors didn't get around, right? But without a formal announcement, with internal announcement, rumors would have just been rumors, and people would have been loath to take any action. And so they kind of caught them by surprise. Okay, great. That was a bold maneuver and risky. Because I know of instances where people have come out that are within the military intelligence complex, made a personal move, and got yanked back in pretty damn fast. I don't necessarily think their careers were ruined, but they were basically told, you're not going to do that. So when they weren't stopped, and possibly that was because they were already in the New York Times so quickly, but whatever, they were not stopped. They are still going. They are still here. That tells me that the opposition to disclosure from whatever source, whether it's purely on the basis of national security or religious beliefs or anything else, is not enough to prevent this process from going forward.
Well, let's talk
what
about.
I'm saying is, it's not that big a deal. I don't want to pin this on people of strong religious convictions. They are not the key barrier here.
Well, let's talk about what I asked you earlier in the program. Then, leading up to this, and that is, what's going to happen when they tell us? What are we going to do?
Sure. Okay. Boy, I love this question. And we're going to end up going over an hour. I can tell you that right now, but that's okay. I'm good. I'm good for another 50 minutes. I got another interview. But look, the question is, how's disclosure going to go down? Is one of the great questions of our time. Richard Dolan has said a lot about it and written a lot about it. I've said a lot about it, haven't written, though I need to maybe do that. And Bryce Abel and others. No one knows for sure. But here are some things I can put out there for your listeners. A great deal of the things that you have read or heard about how disclosure will go down, particularly that are negative things, are propaganda. They are propaganda put out by the government in whatever ways they do this to serve the truth embargo. In other words, if we can scare people about it, they'll be reluctant to engage it, particularly people inside government. I believe most of the scare stuff has been targeted really at the government people, not so much the general public. In other words, you're a lieutenant in the Air Force, you're a captain in the Navy, you're a high-level person in the Pentagon, you're working for a government contractor on ET technology, whatever. And you're thinking, man, the public really needs to know about this. Maybe I should send some microfiche to a researcher with some photos, or an anonymous tip to the New York Times, or whatever. And believe me, that's happened. But if you want to minimize that, one way to do it is to make the case to the people that work in government, if you do this, religion will collapse, the economy will collapse, people will go crazy, they'll be running up and down the street, ripping their clothes off. It will bring society to its knees. And you don't joke about it. You're making that case. That's what the Brookings Report did. It was nothing but propaganda.
Really, the one I was going to bring up was the Brookings Institute report, and can I tell you why I lend some credibility to that? It's because, from a psychological perspective, we all have our egos. Every human being on the planet has an ego structure, and within that the ego structure, we place ourselves in the world in a certain place. And one of the places that we put in our minds is that we are the only known species, intelligent species in the known universe. And so what happens on the day that everyone across the planet simultaneously has to undergo a restructuring of their ego?
Well, here's what you're missing. If as of March 20th of 2021, everybody in this planet was absolutely their worldview of everybody in this planet was that they are absolutely alone in the universe, it would become rather of a shock. Except, of course, that as of no later than 1947, July, some members of the human race learned that we're not alone in the universe. The government got an extraterrestrial craft with extraterrestrials in it. Since then, the number of people that have come to understand, suspect, learn about that we are not alone in the universe has exponentially grown to the point where it's probably about 80% of the entire world's population. In other words, and they've done some polls on this. I mean, they've polled the entire world on this. Ipsos did this, did a global international poll of 36 countries, and 20% of the world's population believe the ETs are already living amongst us. The largest number was India. 50% of Indians believe the ETs are living amongst us. But just in general, since 1947, there have been hundreds of movies about extraterrestrials. They're the highest grossing genre in all of film. No genre in film has generated more income product sales than extraterrestrial-based films, right? Of one type or another.
Right.
The second highest grossing film, no, the two highest grossing films in all of history are the Avengers Endgame and Avatar. 2.8 billion and 2.885 billion and 2.83 billion, something like that. So the fact is that the world is fully aware of the concept of extraterrestrials, fully aware of the idea of going into space, fully aware of the evidence, a huge amount of evidence for the fact that they may be here already. And so, in fact, the disclosure announcement will be anticlimactic. Now, in 1960, right, just 13 years after Roswell, when the Brookings Report comes out, yeah, I can see why they decided to do a full psychoanalysis of the entire world's population and come to the conclusion that, boy, they're going to get really upset. Okay. Well, let's just say that that was disingenuous in the least. I believe, and until I'm told otherwise, that was included in the Brookings Report specifically because it supported the Truth Embargo, which was still in its early days. And that was to favor the Truth Embargo. And that if the Brookings Report had tried to put a section in there saying that they see no reason why humans can't be informed about extraterrestrials should they be here, they'll handle it quite well. It wouldn't have ever been put in print. Now, but anyway, that was 60 years ago.
Well, think
so
about, but
whatever
Steve,
the hell.
Steve, think about this for a second. I'm just taking the, I guess playing devil's advocate here, but I think one of the things, one of the tacks that the Brookings Institute took was contact with alien technology, and they drew the analogy of superior civilizations coming into contact with inferior civilizations, technologically
Right.
inferior civilizations, and
Mm-hmm.
the inevitable result is that the technologically inferior civilization is absorbed or disappears as a result of the presence of the technologically advanced civilization. And so,
Sure.
is that conclusion incorrect?
Yes. First of all, there's one key logical fallacy. It is anthropomorphic. In other words, what Brookings is saying is they're looking at this from the human perspective, anthropomorphism.
I see.
They're saying that the encounter between humans, human civilization, and extraterrestrials with a different worldview and different technology would go the same way it went for the Aztecs and Cortez, right? Or the Indians
Mm-hmm.
and the Europeans,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, that's what we do. That's how we roll down here. To expand that to intergalactic or interstellar encounters is a pretty big leap and quite bold.
Well,
Now,
let me keep going. Let me keep going. Okay, so we were talking about Roswell, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you and I both know that when the Roswell incident took place, it's likely that there was some technology derived from that, just as Colonel Corso said, that we got
Yeah.
things like, flat screen displays, things of that nature, circuitry and so forth. And so,
Yeah, okay.
so in my view, that is contamination, and
Contamination.
yeah, exactly, that we were contaminated by this technology, and as a result of our contamination, that perhaps we would not, if it were not for our contact with that, that contamination, maybe we wouldn't be on the brink of destroying ourselves right now, because we've used that technology to do what humans do best: turn it into a weapon.
I'm going to somewhat disagree.
Okay.
First of all, we were already on the way towards destroying ourselves without any extraterrestrial help. We had developed atomic science. We'd cracked open the atom. We figured out how to weaponize the atom, and we dropped 2 bombs on Japan. And the ETs has having nothing to do with that. The technology was gotten from that craft was not particularly significant in terms of weaponization. I'm not saying that they didn't do it. A lot of the stuff that Corso referred to, we would have figured out anyway. But the connection between Roswell and civilization destroying weapons, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, the other point I was going to make was not just anthropomorphism, but that we're talking about disclosure.
Yes.
Now, disclosure is not contact. All right, disclosure is not contact.
I agree.
And by the way, the developed world has been going into the less developed world and building, water treatment plants and providing technology and computers. We do that too, and it doesn't lead to the developed world becoming suddenly a major threat. However, in technology in general, without mentioning ETs at all, is weaponizable. That's a general. And we were going to weaponize technology whether the ETs arrived or not. So the real issue is not are ETs helping us weaponize technology. The real issue is we have got to stop weaponizing technology. And when you look at the action of the ETs, particularly the turning off our nuclear weapons, they seem to be sending just the opposite message. What the hell are you doing with these weapons? Right? Are you out of your mind? That's what the witnesses believe, and I've talked to many of them. In any event, okay, disclosure versus contact. All right, so this gets tricky. The announcement and confirmation of the extraterrestrial presence will impact the worldview of every living person on the planet. And I can make a very good case while that impact will be positive. And I'm happy to debate anybody who wants to get in front of a really cool audience. Harvard would be nice, and make the case why it would be negative impact on the worldview of the human race. It would make a fabulous debate, but Harvard is not going to let me within 1,000 miles of their friggin' auditorium. So that's not going to happen. But look, open contact is another matter. And so we're not mingling ETs, we're not mingling technologies, we're simply confirming their presence. Open contact, if it's going to come, will come later. And one can discuss how that will go. Now, one could make the case, and I have made this case, that the ETs have been deliberately waiting for global disclosure, global confirmation.
Yes.
By the authorities before having open contact. Why? Not so they could wreak maximum harm, but because it would minimize the disruption. In other words, the ETs can disclose themselves to us anytime they want. They can make themselves overwhelmingly present. And there's the classic moment in the movie Independence Day, the good one. The second one was about one of the worst movies I ever saw. When the president, Bill Pullman, walks out on the balcony and the damn craft is right over Washington, D.C., and he says to his aide, I guess the question of are we alone has been answered. And, of course, all hell breaks loose. So they have not done that.
Mm-hmm.
They have not done that. I believe that the reason they haven't done it is it would be destructive. However, once formal disclosure has taken place in a year or two of massive public engagement of the issue and God knows whatever else, I mean, it'll be quite intense, that open contact would be anticlimactic. And so
would that not be
argument
the
is
next
about,
step too? That it is after we have contact, or rather after we've had the hearings in Washington and the
yes.
truth comes out. That is the next logical step. We've acknowledged the ET presence, and would not
Right.
exopolitics then begin the next step?
Well, exopolitics is already happening.
Mm-hmm.
That would just be another aspect of exopolitics. Here's
my problem with the exopolitics movement, and although I think that it's absolutely necessary.
It's not a movement. It's not a movement. It's not a movement. There is a disclosure movement.
Mm-hmm.
There is an exopolitical movement, right? Meaning it's a movement involving exopolitics, but exopolitics is simply a division of political science.
Well, I agree, but in politics, in my view, in exopolitics, you need to be talking to someone else. And so if there is an exopolitical process taking place, that in my mind, that necessarily requires the presence, an ET presence actively taking place in that political discourse.
Not exactly. There is a great deal of in political science that is very important, studied very well, that doesn't have to do with people talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Politics has all kinds of facets: structure, context, governance, laws that are not just about dialogue and people contacting each other. So exopolitics there's been plenty of exopolitical things happening. So, but let's face it, exopolitics will also become the study of the relations between humans and non-human civilizations, in which case, of course, it's rocking and rolling, and there will be exopolitics departments all over the universities and colleges of this country, which have managed to completely stonewall and avoid, to their utter disgrace, this issue for 74 years, and they have a lot to answer for there. So the point is that, and the key point that I want to get across is that one of them is that where this has all been heading from the day, I don't know about prior to 47. I don't know about ETs, coming down 4,000 years ago, though I think they did, and interacting with primitive civilization, earlier civilizations, a wholly different context. I don't know about that. I think it happened. I'm talking about the modern context. Why is it different than the ancient context? Because we are and became finally, in the 20th century, a global civilization, a full global civilization, not a planet where people all over the world had no idea that people elsewhere even existed. Right? That's not a global civilization. And if they did know, they'd have to take a camel and walk, I don't know, for 17 months in order to see one of them. Right. No, global civilization, high technology, global civilization. Where this is going from the moment a bunch of chevron-shaped craft turned up in the skies around the U.S., over Mount Rainier, and then one or more of them crashed in New Mexico for reasons that are not clear, but I think it was an accident. From that moment forward, where we have been going is towards disclosure and open contact. That has been the agenda of the extraterrestrials. And that open contact could be as close as 2 years from now if we get hearings this year. Now, let me repeat that. If we can get hearings, which almost absolutely lead to disclosure because the testimony, we already know what the testimony is going to be. It's going to be absolutely compelling, riveting. We could be 2 years from open contact, not conflict with, but open contact with extraterrestrials that have been nudging this process along for 74 years in their own ways. All right? That is a big deal. All right. And every single person on this planet needs to think about that. Meaning, do I like that idea of having open contact with non-human civilizations? Do I like the idea of maybe eventually being able to have interstellar drive and be able to explore the galaxy and so forth? They have to think about that now, but it gets complicated, not surprisingly. And this is where a lot of people have to check out, and I understand that. This is not going to come up in the initial hearings in Congress, I assure you, but it will come up in the hearings after disclosure. And what am I referring to? We have not had open contact with extraterrestrials in a modern era, maybe in the ancient times, but we have had covert contact. The extraterrestrials are engaging individual humans, and that's called contact. And those humans are called contactees. And there are millions of them. That's a strong statement, but I can tell you, if again, some Harvard professor wants to debate that issue, I can provide more than ample evidence that the number of people being engaged directly by ETs is in the millions. Now, whoa. So that's, I guess you could call not open contact, but private contact. It's kind of like having one of those public congressional hearings as opposed to the private congressional hearings for classified material. And so once you integrate that into your scenarios, things kind of clarify a little bit, because one of the key questions that is asked is, why are they bothering at all? Why are they putting the crop circles down? Why do they harvest blood and tissues from animals? Why do they care? Why do they turn off our nukes? What the hell is the reason they just go? They can travel the galaxy probably. If interstellar drive, if they've circumvented the, if they've done a workaround the relativity theory, they can probably travel the galaxy. Why in the hell are they hanging here? Because they have been involved with us for a long time. That we've been on their radar for quite a while. Not just one group, but many groups.
They didn't just show up in 1947 and say, hey, look, there's a whole civilization here. They've been here for a really long time, right?
I know. Involved, but involved, if involved was just they've been watching us, right? The watchers and filming, right? And sending back documentaries.
Steve, let me
their
ask
home
you this.
planet.
Would you be surprised if you were to find out later that there was, in fact, some high-level liaison taking place between our government or perhaps, members of some black operation somewhere and the ETs?
Would I be surprised? No. Do I think there's evidence that confirms that? No. And so until I have that evidence, it's an unknown. So the point I was making was this, that it's not that they've just been watching us for thousands of years. They've been involved with us genetically. It's the genetic connection that is the most compelling reason why they're here. Now, if it was just that, then it would be kind of not cool. It would be very uncool. Whatever their reasons for the genetic work they're doing with human beings, and they are, I mean, we have ample evidence for that, because we have now increasing number of contactee reports. I mean, initially one time it was Betty and Barney Hill, and that's it. And then a couple more, and then a couple more. Well, now it's in the hundreds of thousands. All right. And so we have a pretty good idea of the kinds of things they're doing. They're doing genetic work with humans. And I don't think it's trivial. They didn't come all this way for the hell of it, or just to experiment. This is real connections, important, powerful connections. And so I believe the genetic work that they're doing, and of course, all of the engagement they've had with individual citizens in the context of a modern global civilization, which is what we have now, I think it's kind of reached a point where they need to move to the next step. In other words, as we become more and more aware of their existence, this genetic work becomes problematic. Almost like at some point, you're going to have to develop a relationship with this planet and the people on it and get permission, something like that. It's also possible that once disclosure takes place, they may stop it, meaning, okay, we've done what we've done, but now you're aware of us. We're going to have open contact with you, and there will be no more of that. I can't say for sure, but it's this other connection. So when we announce the extraterrestrial presence, there are quite a few people on this planet that are going to say, yeah, I know that. I've been dealing with them since I was 5 years old. What's important is that these people are now telling other people that. There are movies about contact. There are movies about abduction. There are documentaries about it. There are books about it. These are all over the world. I don't know how many people are familiar with the idea of extraterrestrial contact abduction, probably hundreds of millions. And so once again, when you view it from the larger perspective, you got to scratch your head and say, what in the hell does the government think it's doing keeping this from us? My God, it's getting to be absurd, and it's becoming irritating. So that's my answer to the question. What's going to happen with disclosure? What's going to happen with disclosure? People are going to be real excited. They're going to watch their TVs. They're going to study the issue. It's going to be an intense period, and nobody's going to go crazy, at least no more than usual. And at some point, we'll have open contact, and probably that's going to go pretty well too. I think people are going to be overjoyed. Why? Because one of the other things that has emerged in the last 30 years, particularly the last 30 years, but certainly the last 20 years, is that forget the extraterrestrials. The human race is breaking down. The institutions are breaking down. We've reached points of no return across the spectrum of issues. The size of the population, the impact on the environment, the amount of weapons, the destruction of those weapons, the human suffering, the lack of resources that are coming very soon. There's and by the way, I mean, I could send you report upon report upon report. You can find scores of reports confirming exactly what I'm saying, is that if we don't solve a whole bunch of problems and make some major adjustments in our worldview, the 21st century is going to be hell on earth. And by hell on earth, the more people you got, the more people that can suffer, right? You got, in other words, if you've got 50 people over here and they're really having a hard time, that's terrible. If you've got 500 million over here having a hard time, that's not just terrible, that's astronomically awful. All right, that's what this century is heading for. And so if I know that, if I'm one of these geniuses with the supercomputers in the Pentagon or at MIT, and I'm projecting what the 21st century is likely to be like, and I suddenly realize, wait a minute, extraterrestrials are here, that's been confirmed, and we're going to have open contact, I would be ecstatic. I would be thrilled, because disclosure and open contact definitely opens the door to possibly turning this whole thing around and turning this century from being a nightmare where the living envy the dead to the Renaissance turning point in the history of the human race, which I think has happened to other planets throughout the galaxy, where we make a right turn towards sanity. And one of the reasons we're going to make that turn, and I'll say this with emphasis, is that one of the first things I think is going to happen once we have open contact is we're going to learn from our governments, as told to them by extraterrestrials, part of some alliance, which probably is not called the Galactic Federation, that guess what? My fellow Americans, my fellow Russians, my fellow Chinese, these extraterrestrials are willing to engage us in a form of alliance, and there could be enormous benefits to the human race because they have extraordinary technologies which would help solve our problems.
Certainly, we could reach out to them and ask them to help us if we were.
Yeah, we could ask. Okay, fine, we probably will. But this is not going to happen. This will only happen on one primary condition. And here's that condition. Humans. We are quite aware that your advanced physics is closing in on the workaround for relativity, thus allowing you to build craft that could go interstellar. Unfortunately, you're also armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons, advanced nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
There is no possibility that you are going to be able to bring those weapons into space.
We're not going to let you.
You're not leaving the solar system with those weapons. And any reasonable person would immediately conclude, of course we're not. Any extraterrestrial civilization would be out of its mind to allow a developing situation like ours to bring weapons into space. I mean, real weapons, atomic weapons, and be able to come into their solar system with those weapons. And so, folks, we've been watching you for a long time. You've got to that point. So here's the deal. You have to get rid of the nukes. You have to get rid of all of the nukes. And once you've done that, I'm not saying you have to all love each other. I'm not saying you have to raise your GNP to a certain level. You just have to get rid of the nukes. And if you do, we will not interfere with your ability to develop interstellar craft, and we will engage you in ways that could be very beneficial. I think that's what's coming. And I'd be happy to debate that with any fine astrophysicist or political scientist or psychologist or anything else who would make the case that absolutely not. That is not what's going to happen, and here's why. All right. So that's the what's the word I'm looking for? That's the final point, right? I mean, it all comes from Roswell to that point, right? I'm either wrong or I'm right. And all I ask is people to listen and then come to their own opinion.
So we can either become a dead civilization and turn the surface of our planet into molten glass, or we can become an interstellar civilization, an intergalactic perhaps civilization, and evolve and spread out into the universe.
Well, I don't know about spreading out of the universe. Everybody talks about like that's easy to do. That is not easy to do. Right. This idea we're going to put 1 million people on Mars, I have to laugh. Right. Okay.
You're not going to make that launch schedule.
Have access to the galaxy, right? Access to the galaxy. But more importantly, access to technologies which will prevent the catastrophe that we've been working so hard to get. What is the state of global birth control right now? It's a joke.
Yeah.
Right? China is undoing the one-child policy because they think they're running out of Chinese. Well, they are. They're running out of young Chinese, and they can't afford the old Chinese. Whatever. We're building hypersonic nuclear weapons that can't be intercepted. Whatever. I could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
The point is that if there isn't a profound change of view and course, the 21st century is pretty clear, and you can find the reports on this, the analysis on this. The DoD's done it, the CIA's done it, the UN's done it, the other groups have done this. It's simple math. You just do the math, okay? It ain't going to fly. We're screwed. All right. Now the ETs are here, and you may say, well, look, maybe they're just going to disclose, have some open contact, and say, look, yeah, okay, fine. We're not going to abduct anymore. Good luck, and we're going home. I don't think so. And you want to know why? Because of the single most important piece of evidence related to the ET presence that we have that has been put before the government for 20 years. Press conferences have been held. Books have been written. The government's been told about it, and they have done nothing. No hearings. No statements. Absolutely nothing. And I'm talking about the scores of witnesses to nuclear weapons tampering of our nuclear facilities, in which our nuclear weapons are turned off in the presence of a hovering craft that doesn't look like a Sikorsky helicopter. And then we can turn them back on. And other instances, fewer, much fewer, but still have happened, not only in the United States, but in the Soviet Union, where they turn them on. And what I mean by that is they set in motion a launch sequence. In Russia, well, and what happens, of course, is the people on the base and in the silos are running around like crazy people.
I think they've also changed the launch codes.
Absolute panic. I don't know about that. But I'd have to send me a link on that if that's true. But they have put them into launch mode. And in Russia, they took them right up to the point where they were about to launch. And I imagine the men and women in that base were literally white as a sheet, because they knew if those missiles launched, nuclear war was on. It was on. And that was the ball game. And then they turned it off. Now, I call these two forms of intimidation. The first one is mild, and that is we turned them on and you turned them off. We didn't melt them down. And people, okay, well, that was scary. And that's been the predominant thing that's happened here, though I think there has been a turn on. The launch thing is a much more severe message. This is an absolute scare the holy crap out of you message.
Yeah.
I think that was done more in Russia. I think the Soviet Union, I think the ETs probably view the Soviet Union as more hard line, more likely to do possibly launch. And there's been a couple of times when they almost did. I'm speculating here, but I think logic says, hey, we know how severe the Soviet Union was. We know how intense they were. And so they might have scared them a little bit more. But here is the point. Why do they bother to point out the foolishness of our nuclear weapons if their intention is to have open contact and then say, well, that's it. We're here. Get back to us whenever. Go, we're going to go away now. Or here's a little bit of technology.
Yes.
Why bother, right? Because if they've engaged us genetically for all of these years, maybe thousands of years, I could see why they would not be thrilled about us nuking the entire planet, turning it into a giant radioactive Hulk, and killing off most of our species. Why would they think that was cool?
I'm hoping they won't let us.
You see, that's another thing. That is one of the key exopolitical questions. There are a lot of people that think, hey, they're here, they're going to be our big brothers and mothers, and if we launch our nukes, they'll stop them right there in the sky. Well, let's list all the wars and things that they haven't stopped, right? Including, Japan. But Japan was kind of a signal. I don't think they will. I think if we're going to nuke ourselves, then we're that determined and we launch them, then they will say, okay, we'll be back in 1,000 years and see how you're doing, because that's us. That is us, right?
Monkeys with guns.
Yeah, I mean, they could melt the weapons down. They could go around the world and they could destroy every nuclear facility we have. They don't do it. Now, on the other hand, I believe if we had, and I hope this is true, but it's more logical. I believe if we had a massive asteroid or meteor coming at us, something the size of Mount Everest, that could hit the planet and virtually wipe out most of civilization, take us back 500 years, I think they'd intercept it, because that's an act of God. It is not us. It's simply bad luck. I don't think they would allow a civilization this advanced to just simply be destroyed like that, when they can easily divert such an object. Now, if they didn't know about it, somehow they didn't know about it, could happen. But if they knew about it, I think they'd divert it. But I don't think they'd stop the weapons. Just saying. I could be wrong. I'll definitely ask the ETs when they finally show up. Was I right about that?
One was a matter of choice, and one was just a matter of chance.
One is a matter of that's what we want to do, by God, then do it. And the other is simply bad luck. And so if I would think, just put all right, let's go anthropomorphic on this, and I'll have to finish with this because I got an interview in 10 minutes. Is imagine if we were the extraterrestrials and we were aware of a civilization that was in one of the planets in Zeta. I'm not Zeta, but Alpha Centauri. It's 4 light years away. And say we had been watching them for a long time, develop slowly. And finally, they developed an advanced civilization, large population, and where our craft are in their airspace, or at least around there. And of course, if we have interstellar drive, we have highly sophisticated, I would imagine, observational technology. As you know, we have technology now at the lever that we're mapping the galaxy. I mean, we're finding planets, hundreds. We're doing a census. We're finding planets that are literally seeing planets that are potential life containing planets with the technology we have now. We're mapping the asteroids. We're mapping anything that's in our that could be a near Earth object. Imagine what we could do if we were another 100 or 200 years further along the line. So we discovered that there is a meteor, a massive object heading for this planet that would literally destroy it, wipe it out, wipe out the life on it, or most of it. Do you think we just go, well, bad luck? What can you say? What can you do? When all we have to do is use one of our craft and go over and bump the damn thing, and it goes off into nowhere. We would divert that object. Mm-hmm. I'm absolutely positive we would do that. Unless we had made that planet an enemy, and they were a mortal enemy, Starship Troopers, and we'd say, okay, fine, you're done, you're toast. That is the ultimate anthropomorphism, which is, and by the way, then I got to go.
Sure.
If any of your listeners want to get a view of what the future would be like in a couple of 100 years, if humans, without interstellar drive, but just very advanced standard Newtonian drive, were to move out into the solar system, literally colonize it, create all kinds of additional structures, and take all of our, screwed up belief systems with us, right? Take all of our fundamental worldview flaws with us. All you have to do is watch The Expanse on, I think, Amazon or Netflix.
Yeah.
It is the best sci-fi series ever made. It is absolutely extraordinary. It is incredibly dense and rich, and you will then see what the solar system will look like if we don't change our worldview real soon. That's what we'll create. Yeah. Another version of the planet Earth today. And it's tremendous, and I encourage it. Yeah. Richard, I love this. This is great. I got to go. I'll come back anytime you want me, because I've always been a supporter of MUFON and its future and growth. I hope it will be an important player in the post-disclosure world.
I appreciate that, Steve, and I think we will be. Things are really happening for us. But Steve, let me tell you that I really, really appreciate you being here today. I really, really do, and I really hope we get a chance to talk again. I'd love to have you on again, because I love talking about this subject, and especially the specific subject of disclosure, which you are no doubt an expert on. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again.
All right, Rich. Thanks a lot, my friend. Got to go.
Okay. Take care, Steve. Thank you very much. And I'll be back in a few minutes with some afterthoughts.
You are not alone. Thousands of people all over the world have sightings of UFOs per month. MUFON is the place to report them. Since 1969, MUFON has been investigating UFO reports and providing this information to the public. Our aim is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. Support UFO research. Join MUFON today.
You are listening to the official podcast of the Mutual UFO Network.
Welcome back. There was a time, not long ago, when I thought Stephen Bassett was just dead wrong. There is no way the government, our government, would ever tell us the truth about the UFO phenomenon. Now, seeing what we are seeing, I have to say that I believe Stephen is correct. I have been doing this myself for more than 40 years, and I can tell you that something is happening, something deep and profound, something that will fundamentally alter the way we view ourselves and our relationship to the universe. But why is all this happening now? Because, as Mr. Bassett knows, it is necessary. It is necessary for our very survival as a species. We cannot continue to live in ignorance. We will learn the truth one way or the other, and it will set us free. As Duke Leto Atreides once told his son, Paul, the sleeper must awaken. Thank you for joining me here, once again, on the official MUFON Podcast. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time, right here on the official MUFON Podcast.